My name is Barry. I'm 32 years old, and I'm standing outside the Sapphire Garden restaurant watching my family arrive in their luxury cars for my father's 65th birthday celebration. My sister B just stepped out of her new Mercedes, loudly telling arriving guests that I wasn't invited because I'm too poor to afford the dinner. I adjust my simple black dress, take a deep breath, and walk toward the entrance, where the valet suddenly brightens with recognition. "Welcome back, Ms. Barry," he says warmly. "Your restaurant looks magnificent tonight." Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and sweet vindication, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turned their mockery into my greatest triumph. Trust me, you won't want to miss the moment when they discover the truth about who really owns this restaurant. 3 weeks before that unforgettable night, our family group chat was buzzing with plans for Dad's birthday celebration. I watched the messages pile up on my phone screen, each one making my stomach twist a little tighter. B had taken charge of the planning, as she always did, suggesting we celebrate at the Sapphire Garden restaurant, the most exclusive dining establishment in the city. "It's perfect for Dad's milestone birthday," she typed, adding multiple champagne emojis. "The dinner prefix is only $300 per person, which is really quite reasonable for the experience." The other relatives quickly chimed in with their enthusiasm. "Absolutely perfect choice, B," our cousin typed back. "Dad deserves the very best." I stared at the screen, knowing exactly what my sister was doing. She knew about my supposed financial situation, or at least what she believed it to be. To them, I was still the family failure, the girl who waited tables and could never quite make ends meet. Clinton jumped into the conversation with his usual cruelty disguised as humor. "Hey, maybe Barry could get us a discount since she's so experienced in the restaurant industry," he wrote, following it with laughing emojis. "She could probably even serve our table if they're short-staffed that night." The messages that followed were filled with more laughing reactions from various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Not one person defended me or suggested we choose somewhere more affordable so everyone could attend. What hurt most was what happened next. B created a separate group chat without me, which I only discovered accidentally 3 days later when our cousin Marie left her phone unlocked on the coffee table during her visit. The preview notification showed B's message clearly. "I told everyone Barry said she couldn't afford it and declined to come. Better this way, honestly." Can you imagine her showing up in one of those outdated dresses from 5 years ago? The pain of reading those words was nothing compared to the replies that followed. Family members I'd grown up loving, who had eaten at my table when I had barely anything to offer, were agreeing with her. They shared their relief that I wouldn't be there to bring down the atmosphere with my constant money troubles. Clinton had even suggested they should tell the restaurant to watch for me in case I tried to crash the party. What they didn't know was that I hadn't been struggling financially for quite some time. In fact, I owned not just one successful restaurant, but 3. The very establishments they frequented for their business lunches and anniversary dinners belonged to me, though I'd kept my ownership carefully hidden behind LLCs and trusted business partners who served as the public face of my empire. 5 years ago, when I genuinely was drowning in debt and working 3 jobs just to survive, I had made the mistake of sharing my dream with them. I told them about my vision of opening a restaurant that would serve comfort food with a gourmet twist, a place where everyone from construction workers to CEOs would feel welcome. Their response had been crushing. Dad had laughed outright, calling it another one of my pipe dreams. "You can barely keep a job as a waitress," he'd said, "and you think you can run a business." That night had been a turning point for me. When I finally achieved success against all odds, I made the conscious decision to keep it from them. They had made their opinions clear when I had nothing. They didn't deserve to share in my victories now that I had everything. The cruel irony of them choosing my flagship restaurant for Dad's party wasn't lost on me. The Sapphire Garden was my first baby, the restaurant that had launched my career and proven all of them wrong. I had personally designed every inch of that space, from the hand-blown glass chandeliers to the custom marble bar that had been featured in Architectural Digest. They had walked past my portrait in the lobby dozens of times, never recognizing the sophisticated woman in the frame as their disappointment of a sister and daughter. As I set down Cousin Marie's phone that day, carefully ensuring the screen looked untouched, I made a decision. They would discover the truth about my success, but it would be on my terms. I wouldn't tell them or confront them with angry words. Instead, I would let them walk into my restaurant, treat my staff with their usual disdain, and slowly realize that the person they had mocked and excluded was the very person who held their dining fate in her hands. 5 years before that birthday celebration, my life had been a series of crushing defeats and small humiliations. I was working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head, the morning shift at a diner downtown, afternoon deliveries for a catering company, and weekend nights at an upscale steakhouse where I learned more from watching the kitchen than from any classroom. Every penny that didn't go to basic survival went into a jar labeled culinary school, hidden in the back of my closet where my roommates wouldn't find it. The family knew about my struggles, of course. In fact, Bea seemed to take particular pleasure in highlighting them at every gathering. "Poor Barry," she would say with false sympathy, "still chasing that restaurant dream. Maybe you should focus on something more realistic, like getting promoted to head waitress." The others would nod sagely, offering their own versions of condescending advice while passing around photos of their latest vacations and home renovations. The situation reached its lowest point when I finally saved enough for the culinary school deposit. I was so proud, so hopeful, until Bea somehow discovered the cash in my apartment during one of her uninvited visits. Within days, she had spread a vicious rumor through the family that I had stolen money from our parents' emergency fund. The accusation was completely baseless, but the damage was done. Dad called me, his voice cold with disappointment, saying he didn't want to pursue charges, but I was no longer welcome at family gatherings until I returned what I had taken. I tried to explain, showed them my pay stubs and the notebook where I'd tracked every dollar saved, but Bea's tears were more convincing than my truth. Clinton piled on, suggesting that my desperate financial situation had driven me to theft, and that perhaps I needed professional help for my problems. The final blow came when I asked them to co-sign a small business loan I'd been approved for contingent on having a co-signer with established credit. Clinton convinced our parents that enabling my delusions would only hurt me more in the long run. 2 weeks later, I was evicted from my apartment. The landlord had been patient with late payments before, but without the loan, I couldn't catch up on back rent. For 2 months, I lived in my beat-up Honda Civic, showering at the gym where I'd managed to maintain a membership and storing my few possessions in the trunk. I'd park in 24-hour grocery store, lots rotating locations, so security wouldn't notice me, and curl up in the back seat with my chef's knives clutched close, not for protection, but for comfort. They were the only valuable things I owned, and they represented a future I refused to give up on. It was during one of those nights, exhausted and hungry, after a 16-hour shift, that I met someone who would change everything. I had splurged on a cup of soup at an all-night diner, making it last as long as possible, while I charged my phone and used their Wi-Fi to apply for yet another job. An older man at the counter noticed my knife roll and struck up a conversation. He introduced himself as a retired chef turned investor, and something about my story resonated with him. He didn't offer charity or pity. Instead, he offered me a challenge. "I'll give you 1 week in my test kitchen," he said. "Cook me something that tells me who you are and where you're going. If you impress me, I'll introduce you to my investment group. If not, at least you'll have had a week of free kitchen access." That week, I poured every ounce of my soul into creating dishes that reflected my journey, elevated comfort food that told stories of struggle and hope of making something beautiful from humble ingredients. Not only did I impress him, but his investment group saw something in me that my own family never had. They provided not just funding, but mentorship, connections, and most importantly, belief in my vision. Within 6 months, the Humble Table opened its doors in a transformed warehouse district location. The concept was simple, but revolutionary for our area: high-end comfort food at approachable prices, served in a space that felt both elegant and welcoming. Success came faster than any of us anticipated. Food critics raved about our innovative takes on classic dishes. The business lunch crowd discovered us first, then date night couples, then families looking for special occasion dinners that didn't require taking out a second mortgage. Within a year, we were turning away more reservations than we could accommodate. The investors approached me about expansion, and we opened the Sapphire Garden, positioning it as the more upscale sister to the Humble Table. By the 3rd year, we added the Grove, focusing on farm-to-table cuisine that attracted health-conscious diners and environmental advocates. Each restaurant had its own identity, but they all carried my signature touch: impeccable food that told a story, service that made every guest feel valued, and an atmosphere that balanced sophistication with warmth. Throughout this meteoric rise, I maintained my privacy carefully. The LLC structure kept my name off public documents, and my business partners handled media appearances and public-facing duties. I had learned from being burned by family that success was best enjoyed quietly. I still lived, modestly drove a reliable but unremarkable car, and wore nice but not designer clothes. To anyone who didn't look closely, I appeared to be exactly what my family believed a woman getting by but never getting ahead. The universe has a sense of humor, though. And when I learned through industry connections that a large party had booked the Sapphire Garden's private dining room for the exact date of Dad's birthday, I did some discreet investigating. My heart raced when I confirmed it was indeed my family's reservation. B had made the booking, throwing around Clinton's name and claiming connections to important people to secure the space. As I sat in my office that night overlooking the kitchen I had built from dreams and determination, I made a choice. I wouldn't hide anymore, but I wouldn't announce myself either. I would let them discover the truth organically in their own time in my space. They would walk into my house, so to speak, and learn that the girl they'd written off as a failure now held the keys to the kingdom they so desperately wanted to impress. The night of Dad's 65th birthday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made the city sparkle. I watched from my office window as the valet team prepared for the evening's guests, their movements precise and professional. My family would be arriving soon for their 7:30 reservation, and I had made sure every detail was perfect. Not for them, but for my own satisfaction in knowing that excellence was simply my standard now. At 7:15, B's silver Mercedes pulled up to the valet stand, followed closely by Clinton's black BMW and several other family vehicles. I observed as they emerged, dressed in what they clearly considered their finest attire. B wore a designer dress that I recognized from last season's collection, her husband trailing behind, checking his phone. Clinton helped his wife out of their car, both of them surveying the restaurant's exterior with obvious approval. "This place is even more impressive than the photos," I heard B exclaim to the group gathering on the sidewalk. "Clinton, darling, you really should bring your clients here. It shows a certain level of sophistication." Clinton nodded, already assuming his usual air of authority. "I've been meaning to meet the owner, actually. Perhaps tonight I can make some connections. You know how these restaurant people appreciate when someone of influence takes notice." They swept into the lobby as a group, bypassing the host stand and heading directly for the private dining room as if they owned the place. B led the charge, her voice carrying across the space as she critiqued everything from the flower arrangements to the music selection. "A bit too modern for my taste," she announced to no one in particular. "But I suppose it's what passes for elegance these days." The staff exchanged subtle glances, recognizing the family from photos in my office, but maintaining their professional composure as I had instructed. The host, Dimitri, approached them with a warm smile. "Good evening. You must be the party for the Morrison celebration. Your private dining room is ready right this way." But B held up a manicured hand to stop him. "Actually, we'd like to see the space first. One can never be too careful with these arrangements. We have very specific standards." They toured the private room as if conducting an inspection, with B pointing out perceived flaws and Clinton testing the chairs for comfort. Dad, I noticed, seemed slightly embarrassed by their behavior, but said nothing to temper it. He had aged in the 5 years since I'd seen him, his hair now completely silver, but he still carried himself with the bearing of a man who expected deference from the world around him. "The table setting is wrong," B declared, after scrutinizing the arrangement. "We need the wine glasses on the right, and these napkins should be folded into roses, not this simple fold. Also, we'll need different china. This pattern doesn't complement my dress." The staff member assigned to their room, Maria, maintained her composure beautifully. "Of course, madam. I'll have our team make those adjustments immediately." As the family settled into their seats, the gossip began almost immediately. Cousin Marie started it, as I knew she would. "Such a shame. Barry couldn't afford to join us tonight. I mean, $300 is quite a lot for someone in her situation." The others murmured their agreement, and B launched into an elaborate fiction about how she had tried to convince me to come anyway. "I even offered to help with the cost," she lied smoothly. "But you know how proud she is. Probably for the best, though. Can you imagine her showing up here in one of those outdated dresses?" Clinton added his own creative additions to the narrative. "I heard she's been picking up extra shifts at that diner downtown. Someone saw her there at 5 a.m. last week, looking exhausted. It's really quite sad when you think about it. All those big dreams, and look where she ended up." His wife nodded sympathetically while admiring her new diamond tennis bracelet, a gift Clinton mentioned he'd purchased to celebrate a recent promotion. Dad finally spoke his tone, carrying a mixture of disappointment and relief. "My youngest daughter has always had champagne dreams on a beer budget. I tried to tell her years ago to be more realistic, to follow her siblings' example, but she never listened. At least she had the sense not to embarrass herself by showing up tonight when she clearly doesn't belong in a place like this." The sommelier arrived with the wine list, and Clinton immediately took charge, dismissing the man's recommendations with a wave. "I think I know a bit more about wine than someone who just memorizes a script," he said, condescendingly. "Bring us the 2015 Chateau Margaux, and make sure it's properly decanted. I can tell when corners are cut." The sommelier Philippe, who had trained in France for a decade and held multiple certifications, simply nodded and replied, "Of course, sir." As the evening progressed, their behavior grew worse. B sent back her appetizer, twice claiming the seasoning was off when it was exactly to specification. Clinton loudly questioned the freshness of the oysters, despite them being flown in that morning from Maine. Other family members joined in the criticism, seemingly competing to see who could be the most discerning and difficult. Through it all, my staff handled every complaint with grace and professionalism. They were well-trained, well-paid, and most importantly, they knew the truth about who their real boss was. Several of them had been with me since the beginning, and their loyalty was absolute. Maria later told me it took every ounce of her self-control not to reveal my identity when Bee snapped her fingers at her like she was calling a dog. As I prepared to make my entrance, I watched from the doorway as Clinton regaled the table with a story about a failed restaurant investment he'd recently passed on. The owner was some nobody with big dreams, but no real business sense. Wanted me to invest in some expansion plan. As if I'd waste my money on someone who couldn't even present properly in a meeting. She actually showed up in casual clothes. Can you believe it? My jaw clenched as I realized he was talking about me, though he clearly hadn't recognized me during our brief meeting 2 months ago, when I'd tested whether he might have changed. It was time. I smoothed my simple but elegant black dress, touched the pearl necklace at my throat that had been my grandmother's, and walked into the main dining room. Several regular customers recognized me and waved, which I acknowledged with warm smiles. The staff straightened slightly, their service becoming even more polished in my presence. I took my time, allowing the energy of my restaurant to fill me with confidence before I approached the private dining room. The family noticed me through the glass doors before I entered. Bee's expression went from confusion to outrage in seconds. Clinton's face darkened with anger. Dad looked shocked, then disappointed, as if my mere presence was a personal betrayal. The other relatives whispered among themselves, clearly scandalized that I had dared to show up after being explicitly not invited. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my head held high and a serene smile on my face. The room fell silent except for the soft classical music playing in the background. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly. "Happy birthday, Dad. I just wanted to stop by and wish you well on your special day." The silence that followed my greeting lasted only seconds before Bee exploded from her chair, her face flushed with indignation. "How dare you crash this party, Barry? You were specifically not invited because you couldn't afford it, and now you have the audacity to show up anyway. This is a private event at an exclusive restaurant. Did you sneak in through the kitchen?" Her voice had risen to a pitch that caused other diners in the main room to glance toward our private area with curiosity. Clinton stood as well, positioning himself as if he were security, preparing to escort out an intruder. "This is really pathetic, even for you, Barry. What did you do, follow us here? Did you think we wouldn't notice you lurking around, trying to get free food?" He turned to the others with a theatrical sigh. "See, this is exactly why we couldn't include her. No sense of propriety or boundaries." The other relatives began their chorus of condemnation. Aunt Catherine shook her head sadly. "Dear, this is terribly embarrassing for everyone. Perhaps you should leave before they have to call security." Uncle Robert added his own particular brand of cruelty. "I suppose when you're desperate enough, shame becomes a luxury you can't afford." Their adult children smirked and whispered among themselves, clearly enjoying the drama. Dad remained seated, but his expression had hardened into the look of disappointment I knew so well. "Barry, you're embarrassing our family in front of the entire restaurant. These people—" He gestured broadly to indicate other diners. "Don't need to witness our personal difficulties. You've made your point about being excluded. Now please leave so we can salvage what's left of this evening." I maintained my composure, keeping my voice level and pleasant. "I'm not crashing anything, Dad. I simply wanted to wish you a happy birthday. I thought family was supposed to be welcome at family celebrations." This seemed to enrage Bee even further. She stepped closer, her designer heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. "Family. You want to talk about family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't chase pipe dreams while expecting everyone else to bail them out. Family knows their place." "And what exactly is my place, Bee?" I asked quietly, genuinely curious to hear her answer. She laughed a harsh sound that carried no humor. "Your place. Your place is serving people like us, not pretending you belong among us. Look at you wearing what's probably your only decent dress, thinking you can just waltz in here like you're somebody. It's pathetic." Clinton decided to pile on, pulling out his phone with a smirk. "You know what I'm going to call the manager myself. I'm sure they'll be very interested to know someone is harassing their paying guests. This is a 5-star establishment, not some diner where you flip pancakes." He made a show of looking for the number, adding, "I might even mention this to the owner when I meet them. People like this," he gestured at me dismissively, "shouldn't be allowed to disturb legitimate customers." As if on cue, one of my servers approached with a bottle of wine, but in his focus on navigating the tension in the room, Clinton turned abruptly and knocked into him. The bottle slipped, and expensive red wine splashed across Clinton's suit jacket and shirt. His face turned purple with rage. "You incompetent fool! Do you have any idea how much this suit cost? This is exactly the kind of amateur service I'd expect from a place that lets just anyone walk in." Maria appeared instantly with towels, apologizing profusely while shooting me a quick glance. I gave her the slightest nod to indicate she should maintain the act. Clinton continued his tirade, demanding to see the manager and threatening lawsuits, while Bea used the chaos to continue her assault on me. "See what you've caused. Everything you touch turns into a disaster. You're like a curse on this family." It was then that James, my general manager, entered the room. He was impeccably dressed and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had worked in high-end hospitality for 20 years. The family immediately turned to him, expecting him to resolve the situation in their favor. "Finally," Clinton said, still dabbing at his ruined shirt. "Are you the manager? I want this server fired immediately, and I want to know how this person," he pointed at me, "was allowed to harass us during our private event." James looked at me first, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes holding a hint of amusement. "Good evening, Ms. Barry. I wasn't aware you were joining the party tonight. Should I have your usual table prepared, or would you prefer to dine with your family?" The room went quiet again, confusion replacing anger on several faces. Bea was the first to recover. "Excuse me, her usual table. Don't tell me she's been coming here claiming to know the owner or something equally ridiculous." "I'm not claiming anything," I said softly, finally taking a seat at the table, despite no one offering me one. The family watched in stunned silence as James personally pulled out my chair and signaled for a place setting to be added. "I'm simply here for my father's birthday dinner. Isn't that right, Dad?" Dad's confusion was evident. "What's happening here, James, was it? Why are you treating her like she's important?" The words stung, but I'd expected nothing less. In his mind, I could never be important no matter what I achieved. James responded with perfect professionalism. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Barry, is one of our most valued guests. We're always honored by her presence." This explanation didn't satisfy Clinton, who had now shifted from anger to suspicion. "Valued guest, her," he laughed harshly. "She can barely afford to eat at McDonald's, let alone a place like this. What's really going on here? Is she dating you? Is that it?" He turned to me with a sneer. "So you're sleeping with the manager to get free meals. That's a new low even for you." Bea latched onto this theory immediately. "Oh my God, that makes so much sense. Poor Barry, so desperate for a taste of the good life that she's willing to degrade herself. How long has this been going on? Do you sneak in after hours for your little rendezvous?" The other relatives tittered and whispered, clearly enjoying this new scandal. Cousin Marie actually took out her phone, probably to text this juicy gossip to the family members who couldn't attend. I remained calm, though my hands clenched slightly in my lap. These people who shared my blood were so quick to assume the worst, so eager to believe I could only access nice things through manipulation or degradation. They couldn't fathom that I might have earned my place here through my own efforts and achievements. Philippe returned with the replacement wine, a bottle from my personal collection that I kept for special occasions. He showed me the label first, as was proper, completely bypassing Clinton, who reached for it. "The 2009 Romanée Conti, as you requested earlier, Ms. Barry." Clinton's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. That bottle was worth more than most people's monthly salary. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "She couldn't possibly afford that." "Who said I was paying for it?" I replied calmly, swirling the wine in my glass after Felipe poured a taste for my approval. The family exchanged confused glances, trying to piece together what was happening. Their assumptions and prejudices were blinding them to the obvious truth that was staring them in the face. Every interaction, every deferential gesture from the staff, every small detail pointed to one conclusion they were too proud to reach. The tension in the private dining room was shattered by the arrival of Mayor Patricia Holbrook, who swept in with her characteristic energy and warmth. She was dressed elegantly, but not ostentatiously, as befitted someone who understood both power and public service. Her face lit up when she saw me, and she immediately changed course to approach our table, her security detail hanging back discreetly. "Barry." "What perfect timing!" she exclaimed, reaching out to clasp my hands warmly. "I was hoping to catch you tonight. I wanted to thank you personally for your incredibly generous donation to the city's youth culinary program." Thanks to you, we'll be able to provide training and mentorship to over 200 underprivileged kids this year. She beamed at me with genuine affection. You always said you wanted to give back to the community that raised you, and you've done so beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The silence from my family was deafening. Bee's mouth had fallen open in an expression so comical I had to suppress a smile. Clinton looked like he'd been slapped, his earlier smugness evaporating instantly. Dad stared at the mayor as if she'd grown a second head, unable to reconcile her words with his image of me as the family failure. Mayor Holbrook, sensing the awkward atmosphere, but not understanding its cause, continued cheerfully. I hope I'm not interrupting a celebration. Oh, wait, this must be the family dinner you mentioned. How wonderful that you're all together. She turned to address the table at large. You must be so proud of Barry. She's become such a pillar of our business community. The way she's revolutionized fine dining in our city while maintaining accessibility and supporting local suppliers is just remarkable. Before anyone could recover enough to respond, 3 more figures entered the room. I recognized them immediately as my primary investors, the ones who had believed in me when I had nothing but dreams and determination. Richard Blackstone, looking distinguished in his tailored suit, spotted me and approached with a warm smile. Behind him were Jennifer Chung and Marcus Rodriguez, both successful entrepreneurs who had become mentors and friends over the years. Very excellent. We were hoping to steal a few minutes of your time, Richard said, nodding politely to the stunned family members. I know you're with family, but we have some exciting news about the Chicago expansion that couldn't wait. He pulled out a folder, his enthusiasm evident. The property we discussed is available, and the numbers are even better than we projected. If we move quickly, we could have your 4th location open by spring. Jennifer added her own excitement to the mix. The Portland location is already exceeding projections by 30%. I told you that market was ready for your concept. She glanced around the table, seeming to notice the strange atmosphere for the first time. I hope we're not intruding on a special occasion. Clinton found his voice first, though it came out strangled. 4th location, Portland. What are you talking about? His face had gone pale, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Something was starting to click, though he was fighting against the obvious conclusion. Marcus, ever the diplomat, extended his hand to Clinton. I don't believe we've met. Marcus Rodriguez, Pinnacle Investment Group? We're Barry's partners in the restaurant group. And you are... Clinton shook his hand mechanically, his usual confidence completely shattered. Clinton Morrison, I'm Barry's brother. Restaurant group. It was then that Henri, my executive chef, made his entrance. He rarely left the kitchen during service, but I had asked him to make an exception tonight. He approached our table with the authority of someone who had earned 3 Michelin stars before choosing to work with me. Barry, I need your approval on the seasonal menu changes. Also, the Times critic is here tonight, table 12. Should I send out the usual tasting menu? The revelation was building like a wave, and I could see it about to crash over my family. Bee's face had gone from red to white, and back again, her hands gripping the edge of the table. This isn't possible, she whispered, though everyone heard her. You're a waitress. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. Actually, Jennifer interjected helpfully, not understanding the undercurrents. Barry could buy a dozen luxury cars if she wanted. She just prefers to invest profits back into the business and the community. That's what makes her such an exceptional CEO. No ego, just results. She smiled at me with obvious respect, though I keep telling her she should at least upgrade to something with better safety features. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place for Clinton when Richard pulled out his phone to show Marcus something. Look, here's the article from last month's Forbes feature. They called Barry one of the 30 under 40 revolutionizing American dining. Great photo, too, really captures the essence of the brand. He turned the screen toward the table, showing a professional photograph of me standing in front of the Sapphire Gardens entrance, looking confident and successful. Clinton's face went ashen. Wait! That investment opportunity I rejected 2 months ago. The expansion proposal from SGB Restaurant Group. That was you. His voice cracked on the last word, the full weight of his mistake crashing down on him. I nodded slightly, remembering how he'd dismissed me within 5 minutes of the meeting, not even recognizing his own sister in professional attire and makeup. Bee's husband, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. The business magazine on my desk last week, the cover story about the woman revolutionizing comfort food dining. I thought she looked familiar, but... He turned to Bee with dawning horror. You said your sister was a failure. You said she was nobody. Dad finally found his voice, though it shook with emotion I couldn't quite identify. How is this possible? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? The hurt in his voice might have affected me once, but I had built my armor from their rejection and mockery. Their pain at being excluded from my success was nothing compared to what I had endured when they excluded me from their lives. James reappeared with perfect timing, holding a leather folder. Ms. Barry, I hate to interrupt, but these require your signature before the end of the evening. The contractor needs approval for the Miami location renovations, and there's the matter of the charity gala guest list. He placed the papers in front of me, as if this were routine, which it was. The family watched as I reviewed documents involving sums that made their eyes widen. Also, James continued, Chef wanted you to know that your mother's favorite dessert is prepared for the birthday celebration, as you requested. The kitchen staff sends their best wishes to Mr. Morrison. This detail, that I had remembered Dad's favorite dessert was actually Mom's recipe and had it specially prepared, seemed to break something in him. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. Aunt Catherine, always one to adapt quickly to new social dynamics, suddenly became sweetly solicitous. Barry, darling, this is all so overwhelming. We had no idea you'd done so well for yourself. You must tell us everything. How did you manage such incredible success? Her tone had shifted completely from condescension to calculated interest, already plotting how she might benefit from this revelation. But it was Cousin Marie who delivered the final blow to their delusions. She had been frantically searching on her phone and now held it up triumphantly. Oh my God, it's all here. Barry owns this place. She owns the Humble Table and the Grove, too. Look, here's the corporate filing. SGB Restaurant Group, Sapphire Garden, Barry. You named it after yourself. The truth hung in the air like a physical presence, undeniable and overwhelming. My family sat in various states of shock, processing the reality that the person they'd dismissed, mocked, and excluded hadn't just succeeded. I had surpassed them all. The very restaurant they'd chosen to showcase their supposed sophistication belonged to the family failure they'd been too ashamed to invite. The revelation of my identity shattered the careful composure my family had maintained throughout the evening. Bea was the first to crack completely, shooting up from her chair with such force that her wine glass toppled, adding to the evening's growing collection of stains. Her face contorted with rage as she pointed an accusatory finger at me. This is all a setup. You knew we were coming here and you orchestrated this whole thing to humiliate us. Her voice had reached a pitch that carried well beyond our private room, drawing concerned glances from other diners. You think you're so clever playing the victim all these years while secretly building your little empire. You wanted us to look foolish. This entire evening has been about your petty revenge. Spittle flew from her lips as she continued her tirade, years of jealousy and insecurity pouring out in an ugly torrent. Clinton joined his sister's meltdown, though his anger was tinged with something else entirely: greed and missed opportunity. That investment meeting 2 months ago, you deliberately hid who you were. You came to my office dressed down pretending to be some nobody entrepreneur. You made me look like an idiot in front of my partners. His hands clenched into fists on the table. Do you have any idea how much money I lost by passing on that opportunity my partners invested with your competitors instead? The financial implications were clearly eating at him. I could see him doing mental calculations, figuring out exactly how much profit he'd missed out on. That expansion would have netted at least 40% returns in the first year alone, maybe 50, and you deliberately sabotaged my chance at it. The accusation was rich, considering he'd dismissed me within minutes of my arrival at his office, not even offering me water while I waited in his lobby for 40 minutes past our scheduled time. Dad seemed to be struggling with a different kind of emotion entirely. His initial shock had morphed into something that looked like wounded pride mixed with indignation. All these years you let us believe you were struggling. You attended family gatherings in old clothes, driving that embarrassing car, accepting our pity and condescension. Why? What kind of daughter lies to her father like this? The kind of daughter who was told she'd never amount to anything. I replied quietly, my calm tone a stark contrast to their hysteria. The kind who was accused of theft when she tried to better herself. The kind who was left homeless when her family refused to help. Each word landed like a physical blow, and I saw Dad flinch at the reminder of their cruelty. The chaos escalated when James discreetly approached with the leather check folder. The bill for their elaborate dinner with multiple bottles of premium wine and extensive modifications to every dish had reached a staggering sum. Clinton grabbed it first, his face going from red to white as he processed the total. $12,000 for one dinner. He looked around the table as if someone might explain this was a mistake. Without hesitation, he pulled out his credit card, the Black American Express he'd been bragging about earlier in the evening. He handed it to James with forced casualness, trying to maintain the facade of wealth and success. We all waited in tense silence as James processed the payment. The distinctive beep of a declined transaction cut through the room like a knife. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined. Would you like to try another?" James's professional demeanor never wavered, but I could see Clinton's world crumbling. He fumbled for another card, then another. Each rejection was another blow to his carefully constructed image. Bea watched in horror as her brother's financial house of cards collapsed in real time. "There must be some mistake," Clinton muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Try this one." He handed over a fourth card with shaking hands. When it too was declined, he turned desperately to his wife, who shook her head minutely. They were broke, or at least too leveraged, to handle an unexpected $12,000 expense. Bea, sensing the shifting dynamics, quickly reached for her designer wallet. "This is ridiculous, Clinton. I'll handle it." She passed her card to James with exaggerated confidence, making a show of how a successful person handles minor inconveniences. The family held their breath, hoping to salvage some dignity from the situation. The second decline hit harder than the first. "This is impossible!" Bea shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "That card has a $50,000 limit." Her husband Mark finally spoke up, his voice heavy with resignation. "Not anymore, Bea. I tried to tell you last week. The credit company reduced our limits after the third mortgage on the house. We're maxed out on everything." The family turned to Dad, their natural assumption being that the patriarch would handle the bill for his own birthday celebration. Dad reached for his wallet with the slow movements of a man walking to his execution. He opened it, stared at the contents, and then closed it again. I seem to have forgotten my credit cards. I only have about $200 in cash." The other relatives suddenly became very interested in the tablecloth, the ceiling, anywhere but the check that sat like a bomb in the center of the table. Uncle Robert developed a sudden need to use the restroom. Aunt Catherine discovered an urgent phone call she had to take. One by one, they found excuses to distance themselves from the financial disaster unfolding before them. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice cutting through their panic. "You chose the most expensive restaurant in the city, ordered without any consideration for cost, treated my staff with disdain and disrespect, and now you can't actually afford any of it." The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. The family who had excluded me for being too poor were now trapped by their own pretensions. Bea turned to me with desperate eyes, her earlier venom replaced by naked need. "Barry, you own this place. You can comp the meal. It's Dad's birthday after all. Family helps family, right?" The words came out rushed and pleading, a far cry from her earlier assertions that I wasn't really family at all. Clinton, swallowing his pride with visible difficulty, added his own plea. "It would be a simple write-off for you. You'd barely notice the loss. And think about it, we're your family. Your success is our success, right? We're all Morrisons here." The same man who had mocked my dreams and celebrated my failures was now claiming kinship in hopes of financial salvation. Interesting, I mused, pretending to consider their request. "So when I was living in my car, too proud to beg for help after you'd spread lies about me, where was this family solidarity? When I needed a simple signature on a loan document, where was this Morrison unity?" My questions hung in the air, each one a reminder of their cruelty when I had nothing to offer them. Dad finally spoke, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Barry, please, don't humiliate us further. You've made your point. You're successful, we were wrong. Is that what you want to hear? Fine. We were wrong. Now please just help us with this bill." His plea might have moved me once, but I had learned that their apologies only came when they needed something. "I'll pay the bill," I said, finally watching hope bloom on their faces. "But only if each of you acknowledges specifically and honestly how you wronged me. Not generic apologies. I want to hear each person admit what they did." The hope curdled into horror as they realized what I was asking. Public admission of their cruelty in front of the staff they'd mistreated, and within earshot of other diners. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they weighed their pride against their debt. $12,000 versus admitting their faults. For people who had built their entire identities on being better than others, it was an impossible choice. I could see them struggling, calculating whether bankruptcy was preferable to honesty. "This is blackmail," Bea hissed, but her protest lacked conviction. She knew, as they all did, that I held all the cards. They had created the situation through their own choices, from selecting this restaurant to treating me like dirt to living beyond their means. Now the bill had come due in more ways than one. The standoff in the private dining room stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, I stood and pulled out my personal credit card, the one tied to my business account with no preset spending limit. The family watched with a mixture of relief and dread as I handed it to James. Please process this for the full amount, including a 30% gratuity for the staff who dealt with such challenging guests tonight. Wait, Clinton said desperately. You said we had to apologize first. We haven't. I mean, if you're paying anyway. I cut him off with a look that could have frozen champagne. I'm paying because unlike some people at this table, I honor my family obligations even when they've been dishonored by others. But make no mistake, this is the last time I'll cover for any of you. The card went through instantly, of course. $12,000 was significant, but not devastating to my accounts. As James returned with the receipt, I signed it and then turned to face my family one last time. The next words would determine whether any relationships could be salvaged from the wreckage of this evening. I began looking directly at my sister. You've spent 5 years spreading lies about me, turning family members against me, and taking pleasure in what you thought was my failure. Your jealousy and insecurity have poisoned every family gathering. Her face crumpled, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks, but I wasn't finished. You need to understand that your cruelty when I was at my lowest is something I'll never forget. She broke down completely, surprising everyone with the rawness of her emotion. I was terrified, she sobbed. You were always the smart one, the creative one. Even when you had nothing, people liked you better. I thought if you succeeded, I'd become invisible. I'm so sorry, Barry. I destroyed our relationship because of my own fears. Clinton tried to maintain his businessman's facade, but cracks were showing. When I turned my attention to him, he straightened in his chair like a child called to the principal's office. You had a chance to help me when I needed it most, and instead you convinced our parents I was delusional. Then when I came to you as a successful entrepreneur, you dismissed me without even listening because I didn't fit your image of success. His confession came harder, each word seeming to physically pain him. I was afraid, he finally admitted. Dad always said I was the successful one, the one who made it. If my little sister surpassed me, what would that make me? Just another mediocre middle manager pretending to be important. His voice cracked. I sabotaged you because I couldn't stand the thought of you proving Dad wrong about which child was the real success. Dad sat silently through his children's confessions, aging years in minutes. When I finally addressed him, his eyes were wet with tears he'd never shed for me before. You called me the disappointment. You laughed at my dreams. You chose to believe lies about me rather than trust the daughter you raised. You made me feel worthless in my own family. I was wrong, he said, simply, his voice broken. I confused ambition with delusion, dreams with foolishness. I saw your mother in you, her wild hopes and artistic spirit, and it scared me. She died chasing dreams, and I thought I was protecting you by crushing yours. He looked around the restaurant, seeing it clearly for the first time. Instead, I nearly crushed the most remarkable person I've ever known. My daughter. The admissions created a strange atmosphere in the room. Raw honesty, after years of pretense, was jarring, uncomfortable, but also oddly cleansing. Some family members slipped away quietly, unable to face their own culpability. Aunt Catherine and Uncle Robert made excuses and left their departure barely noticed. They would continue living their lives of quiet desperation and loud pretension, but no longer at my expense. But others stayed. Cousin Marie approached tentatively. I'm sorry too, Barry. I gossiped about you, made fun of your struggles. I never stood up for you when they were cruel. Her apology opened a floodgate with other relatives offering their own admissions of guilt and requests for forgiveness. Not all were sincere, but some clearly were. Here's what's going to happen, I announced once the apologies had run their course. Those of you who want to be part of my life going forward will earn it. Every Thursday evening, my restaurants donate all leftover food to local shelters and soup kitchens. Anyone who wants a relationship with me will volunteer at these events. You'll see what real struggle looks like, and maybe develop some empathy. For how long? Bea asked, her mascara ruined, but her attention focused. Until I believe you've changed, I replied. It might be months, might be years. Some of you might give up after one night, but those who stick with it, who actually learn and grow, those are the people I want in my life. Clinton surprised everyone by being the first to agree. I'll be there. Which location? His wife nodded beside him, and I could see they'd already been discussing changes they needed to make. The near-bankruptcy scare had clearly shaken them more than just financially. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my 4th restaurant's soft opening in Chicago. The space was everything I'd dreamed of when I sketched restaurant layouts on napkins during my breaks at the diner. The investor group was thrilled with the early numbers, and advance reservations were booked solid for 3 months. What surprised me most was who showed up to help with the launch. Clinton had been volunteering every Thursday without fail, and somewhere around month 3, he'd stopped talking about business and started asking about recipes. He'd discovered a passion for cooking he never knew existed. Bea had not only volunteered, but had started a food blog highlighting the stories of people experiencing homelessness, using her social media skills for something meaningful. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a volunteer apron I'd given him. He'd been working the prep station all morning, learning knife skills from my sous chef. "The onions are done," he reported proudly. "Chef Marcus says I'm getting better at keeping them uniform." The man who once mocked my culinary dreams now found joy in the simple act of properly dicing vegetables. Not everyone had made the journey. Several relatives had shown up, once taken selfies for social media to show their charity work, and never returned. Others had lasted a few weeks before deciding that maintaining a relationship with me required more effort than they were willing to invest. But those who remained had transformed in ways none of us expected. "Barry," a young voice called from the expediting station. I turned to see Luna, our newest culinary intern. She was 22, fresh out of culinary school, and reminded me painfully of myself at that age. All dreams and determination, but lacking connections and capital. "Chef, I wanted to thank you again for this opportunity. I know I don't have experience, but I promise I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I assured her, remembering another young woman who'd been given a chance by someone who saw potential where others saw nothing. "Show up, work hard, stay humble, and never let anyone convince you that your dreams are too big. That's all I ask." Later that evening, after the successful soft opening, I found myself on the rooftop garden of the new restaurant. The Chicago skyline glittered around me, a far cry from the view from my car windows during those homeless months. My phone buzzed with congratulations from the industry, including several from competitors who'd become friends. Bea joined me on the rooftop, carrying 2 glasses of champagne from the celebration below. "I thought you might want some company," she said tentatively. "Our relationship would never be what it could have been, but we'd built something new from the ashes of the old." She raised her glass. "To second chances, to earned chances," I corrected, but clinked my glass against hers anyway. We stood in comfortable silence, 2 sisters who'd traveled very different paths to reach the same rooftop. The city hummed below us, full of other dreamers, working late shifts and saving tips, hoping for their own chance at transformation. My phone rang, and I saw it was Henri calling from the Sapphire Garden. "Barry, sorry to bother you during the opening, but there's a young woman here asking about entry-level positions. She's been waiting tables at 3 different places, says she heard about our training program. Should I have HR handle it tomorrow?" "No," I said, thinking about all the chances that had led me here. "Send her to my office. I'll be there in an hour." Because success wasn't just about achieving your dreams. It was about making sure the ladder stayed down for the next person climbing up. The girl I used to be sleeping in her car with nothing but determination would expect nothing less from the woman I'd become. As Bea and I headed back inside to rejoin the celebration, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back at me wore designer clothes now and could afford any luxury she wanted. But more importantly, she wore the confidence of someone who'd earned every bit of her success and used it to light the way for others. The family that had once called me a disappointment now looked to me for inspiration. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the redemption. Before we close this story of betrayal, perseverance, and ultimate triumph, I want to ask you, have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of turning rejection into success resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of overcoming adversity. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that their current struggles don't define their future success. Thank you for joining me on this journey from rock bottom to the top of the mountain. Remember, the best revenge truly is massive success, but the best success is the kind that lifts others up with you. Until next time, keep believing in your dreams, especially when no one else does.